Hello, and welcome back to Terri Reid's Attic, a place where we share stories of things that go bump in the night. Sit back, get comfortable, and enjoy the stories. Rusty and Dan have been my dear Facebook friends for many years. They found me through my main mystery series, the Mary O'Reilly Paranormal Mystery Series. As a matter of fact, if the Mary O'Reilly series ever gets made into a television show, we have all agreed that Rusty has to play the part of Stanley. Both Dan and Rusty have been interested in the paranormal for years. They've had many experiences and have been generous enough to allow me to share some of their experiences with you. Thank you, Rusty and Dan. Here are the stories. For the past 25 years, Dan and I have been active with the murder mystery group. The owners moved to Florida this year, so the group has finally come to an end. About 20 years ago, a different group would get together for the weekend in the hills of Northwest Connecticut, at what was then the Mountain View Inn. During our stay, we would do a weekend version of what the regular group was doing. Generally, Dan and I were put in the same room year after year. But one year, Dan and I were put in a different room from the previous visits. This new room had a separate dressing area, as well as a bedroom and bathroom. After the first afternoon, where we'd fleshed out all the beginning of the story plot, we all went our separate ways until dinner time. Dan and I went to our room. I was in the front part of the suite in the little dressing area. Suddenly, I heard a lady's voice say, "Oh, I hope you like this room. This was always my favorite." Of course, I was surprised, as previous visits to the inn had never brought anybody that wasn't alive to come and chat. I told her yes, that I liked it, and explained that we were usually in room 1, but now, since they put us in room 10, we really liked it. She told me that she loved playing cards and always had friends over, and would sit down at the end of the hallway in the little sitting area there. She explained that she really enjoyed entertaining. I don't recall what else we chatted about, but after a while she said that she would go and let me rest. I went into the bedroom and laid down on the bed where Dan was reading, and I told him about my new friend. A little while later she came back and said, "Well, in my day, you didn't see two men lying together like that, but I don't mind. You guys are really nice." And off she went to leave us alone. I told Dan what she had said. Later on, we went down the hallway to the other rooms to visit, and the lady from our sitting room was sitting at the end of the hallway, where she mentioned earlier that she loved to play cards. As I passed her, she told me she was so excited that there was a fun bunch of folks here. Throughout the weekend, I would see her, and we would chat about different things. Sunday morning, at the conclusion of the story and breakfast, we asked the owners what group would be coming next weekend. One of the owners said, "Oh, we're having a group of psychics." I replied, "Oh, then they will have a wonderful time talking to my friend in room 10. Her jaw dropped. She said, "How the hell do you know about the lady in room 10? I said, "We've been visiting all weekend and chatting about all sorts of things." Then she told me that yes, what I had told her about what she had said was true. She had owned the place many years before and loved socializing and card playing. She told me that there was another ghost she would encounter on a staircase that I'd never seen. In all my years coming to the inn, I'd never met that ghost. That was the last year for the weekend mystery, so unfortunately, I never saw my room 10 friend after that. Here's Rusty's next story. First of all, I have to preface this by giving you a bit of history of this area. We are on the border of Connecticut and New York State, the southern part specifically, and back in the 1800s, there was a man who everyone called the Leather Man. He dressed in leather pants, leather coat, and leather hat. He would walk a complete circle from New York to Connecticut, and each year would appear in the same towns. People got to know him and would leave food out for him or allow him to sleep in their barns if they had one. No one actually knew who he was, and he never spoke to anyone. There have been stories about him and that he spoke French, but he was more or less a loner and didn't engage in much conversation. Now, to the present day. A few years ago, Dan and I and our dog Taz loved to walk the trails through a huge park-like cemetery near us. The trails go through the woods, by a river, and then back around to the parking lot. The cemetery is huge and like a park, with sections surrounded by shrubs and trees and benches. Further back is a huge Celtic cross, surrounded by a round stone wall. This is where cremation remains are buried. One evening in the summer after work, I took Taz for a walk to give him some exercise and to enjoy the peacefulness of the cemetery. Because I was watching where I was walking on the uneven ground, I wasn't looking straight ahead. As we neared the Celtic cross, I suddenly noticed Taz stopped and stood up on his hind legs to look at something. "What's got your attention?" I asked. I looked up, and in front of me, a little behind the stone wall, was a man lying on a bench with a big sack of whatever he was carrying sitting next to him. He swung around and sat up on the bench. I was shocked that there was someone I wasn't expecting there. He didn't say anything. Taz was still standing on his hind legs. While in real time this probably lasted all of 10 seconds, time slows down when you're suddenly faced with something you're not sure about. The man stood up and stared at us. Taz stared back. I said, "I'm sorry to bother you." I turned around and said to Taz, "Come on, let's go and leave the man alone." He looked to be a homeless person, and I figured he was resting somewhere where he could. I also wasn't sure if he was mentally okay, so I didn't want to stay and find out that suddenly he was going to chase me, as I physically cannot move quickly. Taz kept stopping to look back, and so did I. But the man just stood there, staring at me. I got back to the car and wondered if I should call the police or let someone know about the man. For some reason, I decided not to. Once we got back to the car and I could contemplate what just took place, I thought, why does this man look so familiar? I've seen him somewhere before. I know it. But where? We got home, and later on I told Dan about my experience. I kept saying that I knew this guy from somewhere. It suddenly came to me. I said to Dan, "This guy was the leather man. Holy you know what. I think I just went through a time shift." A few days later, we went back there so I could show Dan where Taz and I stood and where the man was. So I walked over to where we had seen him and said, "He was just over there, lying on the bench." Dan asked me, "What bench?" I said, "There was one." Wait, the wall wasn't there. I hadn't realized that when I saw him earlier, the wall was gone. I looked over the wall and saw that there was a bench there, but it wasn't the same kind of bench I saw him lying on. I knew that it made no sense, but I clearly saw him lying on a bench with his bag of stuff. After we got back home, we looked up a picture of the leather man again. There is one of him sitting with his bag that he carried next to him and wearing a leather hat. I said, "That's the man I saw dressed like that with that bag. Definitely." Of course, the next dozen times we would go over there, I kept hoping we would have the time shift again so Dan could experience the same thing. But no, of course it didn't happen. However, Taz and I both know what we saw. Here's Dan's first story. This event happened over 30 years ago and was my first paranormal experience. I was a police officer with the New York City Hospital Police. I was assigned to a long-term care facility on the midnight to 8 a.m. tour. The building was stationed in a modified X shape, with a cluster of 4 elevators where the wings met. Then there's a straight corridor that connects to the next X-shaped building, and so on. There were 5 buildings in all, with a hallway in between. From my post next to the hallway, I could see all the way to the last building. At the time, there was an elevator operator on duty. At about 2 a.m., he advised me that he was going on a 20-minute break. I watched him walk down the corridor towards the next building and go into the locker room. I was at my desk reading a magazine. From the corner of my eye, I saw a nurse in an old-style nurse's uniform, a tri-point white hat and a long white gown, come from my right and enter the elevator the operator had just vacated. "You'll have to use one of the other elevators. He just went on break," I called out. There was no response. Thinking she didn't hear me, I got up and walked towards the open elevator car and repeated the information. "You'll have to use one of the other elevators." That was as far as I got, as I was now looking into the empty elevator car. Okay, I must have imagined that, I thought to myself, and went back to my desk. I sat there running it over in my mind, trying to make sense of what I thought I saw. I saw it, but what did I see? A little while later, the elevator operator returned. I told him that I had just had an interesting experience. He asked me what happened, and I proceeded to tell him that I saw a nurse come from that ward, and I pointed in the direction she had come, and she entered your elevator. I explained how I'd called out and gotten no response, and then had gotten up to tell her, only to find the elevator car empty. I hadn't described the nurse to him, only that I had seen a nurse. "Oh, you saw the ghost," he replied. "Ghost? Come on, Elmo, knock it off." "Let me describe her to you," Elmo said, and he proceeded to tell me what I had seen, describing the way the nurse was attired. He then told me that about 30 years before, she and her sister were both nurses in that ward. Her husband thought she was fooling around with a doctor and came in and shot both her and her sister. Her sister survived, but she didn't. "Now, want to hear the best part?" he asked. "Sure." Her husband is a patient in the building at the other end of the facility. When he told me who the patient was, I totally believed him, as the patient he identified was a nasty and bitter old man confined to a wheelchair, who gave off the vibe that he'd kill you if he had the chance. He'd even struck a few patients and staff. I never saw her again, and I had that post at least once a week for several years after. And I cannot find anything online regarding the shooting. Dan's second story. This next story happened at the theater where I'm now the technical director. At the time, I was the assistant tech. The tech director, Patrick, and I were working on the overhead theatrical lights, getting ready for a show. As usual, we were working late into the night or early morning, and we would frequently hear noises while working, creaks, groans, etc. We always attributed it to the building expanding or contracting as the temperature changed. One night, we had rented a skylift to reach the lights over 20 feet in the air. We were finished with it for the night and had placed it in the corner at the rear of the theater to recharge. It had been sitting back there for a while. Meanwhile, Patrick and I were sitting on the edge of the stage talking when we heard a loud noise from the rear of the theater. We turned to look and saw the safety chain on the lift bucket wildly swinging. Patrick and I looked at each other and in unison said, "Ghosts." We were the only earthly beings in the building. Since then, we've made it a habit to say hello to the spirits at the theater when we arrive and wish them a good night as we leave. I still do to this day. With all the dangers of working high overhead, the spirits have been very benevolent to us and protected us. There have been several times where we were saved from falling. I've since found out that the ghost was a janitor that used to take care of the building and the nearby school. I guess he's still taking care of the building he managed for years. Dan's third story. I was part of a nighttime cemetery investigation in the middle of June. A group of 7 of us, all paranormal investigators, were investigating a cemetery here in Westchester County. I had taken a picture of 2 headstones of a husband and wife. When I looked at the image, the headstones had a weird red-orange glow. I thought it was glare from the lights of a nearby house, so I took a second picture from a different angle. Same red-orange glow. Then I placed my digital recorder on one of the tombstones and asked if they wanted to talk to us. Buddy, a member of our group, was with me at the time, and we both noticed it getting colder. I pulled out my digital thermometer, and the initial temperature was 80 degrees. As we watched the thermometer, the temperature began dropping on the display rapidly. I began audibly reading off the temperature: 70, 60, 50, 40, 35. At this point, 2 other members, Rusty and Chantel, had joined us and were about 5 feet from us. Chantel commented that she could see my breath, while not seeing hers or Rusty's. I continued reading off the temperature until it bottomed out at 8 degrees Fahrenheit. I was actually shivering from the cold. When I later reviewed the digital recorder, you could hear Buddy and I talking and commenting about feeling colder, and me reading off the temperature, and also Chantel's comments. But suddenly in the recording, I heard another voice. After cleaning up and amplifying the voice, it was a female voice with a Jamaican or Haitian accent saying, "Now you'll know me more." There are no Jamaican or Haitian women in our group. We've had other experiences at this cemetery. Demonic faces in the glass door of the church's activity building, an old-style horse-drawn hearse that appeared for a moment, then disappeared, time shift jumps, and red orbs shooting around. These were great stories. Thank you again, Rusty and Dan, for sharing your experiences with us. Thank you for stopping by Terri Reid's Attic. If you enjoyed the stories, please click like and please subscribe. And please look below for links and more videos. Until next time, from ghoulies and ghosties and long-legged beasties and things that go bump in the night, good Lord, protect us.